The tabernacle has been completed, and now the Lord has come to live with the Israelites. But in order for the Israelites to stay near to the Lord, they must stay clean. But what does that mean? Let's find out. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Tally Talks Bible. As you can see, I have some new equipment here. I've purchased a new mic in hopes to maybe have better sound quality and things of that nature. Hopefully it'll make my content better for listeners and things of that such. I'm also going to be using it for a different purpose that I thought I was going to be able to share some information on that with y'all this week, but unfortunately I was sick earlier this week, so I'm kind of glad that I took some time off because I was kind of down and out for about 3 days. But I'm better now, so I'm here recording for the first time on my new mic, and I'm very excited. We're going to be starting Leviticus. Now, Leviticus, we use Leviticus from the Greek. That's where we get the word Leviticus. And it basically means code of the Levites, because the Levites are who are going to become the priests of the Israelites during this time. In Hebrew, it is Vekrai, and it stands for or means he called, because at the beginning here, where I'm about to jump into, that's what the Lord does. He calls Moses to give him a set of rules and things like that on what needs to be done in order for the Israelites to stay within his presence. So where we're at now, Leviticus just picks up right after Exodus. The Israelites were at Mount Sinai. They completed the tabernacle. The Lord comes down off Mount Sinai into the tabernacle, into the tent. And it picks up, and I'm just going to read right here. The Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. He said, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when anyone among you brings an offering to the Lord, bring as your offering an animal from either the herd or the flock." So this starts off chapter 1. And notice it said he called for Moses from the tent. Not that Moses was in the tent. Reason for that is because Moses at this time is considered ritually unclean. He's not been purified, basically. So I'm going to go over the first 7 chapters of Leviticus, and these chapters deal with offerings. Now, these offerings are so the Israelites could be considered clean to be within God's presence. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each one, because each chapter deals with each type of offering. There's 5 different types of offerings, and each one deals with something a little bit different, and a lot of them are kind of similar with the offering types of what is offered and how it is offered, but they all symbolize different things. We're going to start out here on chapter 1, which is the burnt offering, or olah in Hebrew. And olah means to go up, which I've mentioned this before. When things are burning and the smoke, it billows up. So the smoke is going up to the Lord. And it also just goes into details about what types of animals are to be sacrificed. And also, this type of offering was made for like atonement. So it's kind of similar to like a sin offering, which I'll get into later. But this is dealing with what animals are to be burnt up for this atonement. And this is the most costly because the entire animal is burnt up in the process. So there was nothing left. The entire animal was to be burned up. And like I said, it goes into deep detail, which I'm not going to go into all this. I highly recommend you to go through and read it yourself if you've not. It is interesting, but a lot of people you get to this and it's a little boring. These sections between, you get through Exodus and then like Leviticus and Numbers, it gets a little boring and repetitive, and a lot of people can lose interest. I understand that. That's why I'm not going to sit here and read all these details out, because it is a lot of repetition. So I'm just going to try to break it down into the base meaning. Next, we're going to have the grain offering. Now, the grain offering was more of like giving thanks to the Lord, giving up praise and thank you for everything. Now, it could be cooked or uncooked, and it consisted of like finely ground flour and olive oil and an incense. Now, most common incense back then was, frankincense. And they would mix this all together, and it could either be baked into a bread or it could just be mixed up, and that would be what was offered up. Now, only a portion of this was burnt up. So they would have it all together, and they would take some of it, burn it as the offering, and the rest of it went to the priests. So they would use that as food for themselves, or, if they needed to bake it in the bread if it wasn't already baked. And the rest of the chapter just goes into details on, how you could bake it this way, how you could bake it that way, unleavened, leavened, things of that nature. Now we come to chapter 3, which is going to be the fellowship offering, or Savak Shalaman. I'm practicing my Hebrew. I'm not quite great at it. And that just means, like it says, fellowship. This offering was the main source of meat for the Israelites. Now, this just basically gave a place for them to sacrifice animals the right way for the purpose of eating them. They were to be, something else too that I didn't mention before, is a lot of these animals, they had to be without defect. No blemishes, nothing like that. They had to be pure and clean. And in order to sacrifice these animals, the worshiper or priest, which would be the one doing the sacrificing, would have to place their hand on the animal's head. And this is to signify within, say, the atonement, the burnt offering, that all the sins were being transferred onto this animal. With that being said, once the animal was sacrificed, because, as we know, the penalty for sin is death. So the sin was being transferred to this animal. The animal would die in the place of the sinner. Also, the fellowship offering, it breaks down details into like what you could eat, what you couldn't eat. Things like, you were supposed to drain the blood completely because the blood was the life source, and you were not supposed to consume blood. The fat of the animal was supposed to be burnt up and sent out to the Lord. So it just goes into details of what you could eat and what you could not eat. And it just basically provided the meat for the Israelites to eat. Okay, now we're going to come to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is the longest, I believe, out of all of them. Yeah, I think it's pretty long, considering the length of the other ones. But that's because it's a sin offering. Now, unlike the other ones, the sin offering is focused on who committed the sin. Whereas the other ones we're talking about, like in the burnt offering, is what animal was being brought to sacrifice. This goes into more detail about who committed the sin, what the sin was, what animal is needed for that sin to be burnt up. Even goes into things like unintentional sin, just someone that might be, ignorant and doesn't know the law fully. So they unintentionally sin, which, it's still considered sin, but wouldn't be as bad as, say, if a high priest were to sin. When the high priest would commit a sin, it affected the whole congregation. Now, what these offerings were for, it was to cleanse the entire sanctuary, cleanse the altar, or sometimes it would just be to cleanse the altar. And again, it goes into details on draining the blood. The blood would have to be sprinkled on the altar. The fat must be burned to the Lord. And the things too about these offerings, that they would be fully burnt up, or only some of it that was left, only the priest could eat. That's why when we had the one before with the fellowship offering, that was meant for the people. The other offerings, only the priests were able to consume. No one else. So that's the fourth one. Chapter 5 gets into talking about being clean and unclean when coming to touching bodies. Dead bodies of people, animals, everything of that nature. It also gives details on economic ways for people who were poorer that could give up offerings as sin offerings. Alternative ways that they could still be able to give up offerings for forgiveness of the sin. Then we get into the last offering, which is the guilt offering, or asham. And it gets into details about unintentionally sinning against the Lord and what to do about that. Because even though you did it unintentionally, you were still considered guilty, because you still did it even though you were ignorant to it. Then the beginning of chapter 6 gets into dealing with people that are unfaithful to each other. And let's see, it gets into stuff that's like in the commandments, don't, bear false witness and things like that. And that's pretty much it for all of them. The rest of chapter 6 and going on through chapter 7, all it deals with is, it goes into more details with regulations on everything for the priest and what they must do to uphold all these offerings. And it's just basically reiterating everything, just broken down in little sections. And I'm not going to read all that and bore y'all with it. So, like I said, all this was meant for the Israelites to become clean so they could be in the sanctuary, in and around the Lord. Because if you weren't clean and didn't do these things, you could not be around the Lord, and it was very dangerous. And with my next video, I am going to read a small section. Chapter 8, what it's going to pick up on is the priests, where they're going to be ordained and things like that, and how they begin their ministry. And then we're going to have an incident. But I will save that for the next video. Well, that's all I got for now. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. And I'm glad to be well and making videos again. I guess the Lord knew I needed to take off this week because I was going to be sick. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. And as always, God bless.